When I first got into the gym, all I wanted to do was get lean. I would have quite literally given anything to have a six pack, be able to take my shirt off at the beach and pool and not be so self conscious with how I looked, being able to wear simple things like t-shirts that didn't make me look so fat. So in my desperate efforts to get lean, I spent years yo-yo dieting, which if you don't know what that is, it's basically when you crash your calories super hard, do a ton of cardio. So for months at a time, I'd eat like basically next to nothing, 1200, 1400 calories a day. I'd run laps around my park with my friend at the time, spend hours on my treadmill at home. I'd go to the gym, I'd do the Stairmaster, and I'd lose weight 100%, but then I'd put it all back on and repeat that cycle. But every time I dieted, I started in a worse place, body composition wise, health wise, not to mention the diet fatigue I accumulated, which I never fully washed away. My metabolism was pretty wrecked, and my body's ability to drop fat as well. Fast forward to today, I'm able to execute a proper fat loss phase and get lean basically on command, because what should have taken me 12 to 16 weeks of a properly executed diet phase took me 2 to 3 years, almost 3 years of my life to finally achieve the look I was after, which was just abs at the time. If I had known what I'm about to walk you through in this video, I would have gotten lean in one cut and stayed lean without wrecking my body in the process. So here's the exact 7-step process to get lean and then either stay lean for life or set yourself up to build muscle while minimizing fat gain. Step number 1, prime your body for fat loss. Some of you aren't actually in the right position to diet yet, and I know that's not necessarily what you want to hear, but take me as an example. When I first started, like I said, I went through cycle after cycle of crash diets. I lose 20 to 30 pounds at a time, then gain it all back plus more, which led to my body not only being in no position to drop fat effectively, my metabolism was downregulated. I built up a bunch of diet fatigue, and I never really gave my body any time to reverse all those negative adaptations that occur when you're in a chronic deficit. So this part requires some delayed gratification, and I get it. You want to be lean right now. I did as well. That's why I did all those crash diets. But before we can strip fat off easily, we've got to tick some prerequisites. And there's really only two big ones that we should tick off. The first is if you've been chronically dieting, if you've been eating low calories for months or potentially years on end, your maintenance calories, your set point is artificially low. Your body has adapted, and you absolutely need to spend some time slowly bringing your calories back up, restoring your metabolism, and reversing all those negative adaptations that occur when you're in a deficit before you try to cut again. And number two, if you have little to no muscle tissue. Now, you can absolutely diet with very little muscle, but the truth is you're just going to look like a smaller version of yourself, because muscle is not only what will dictate how lean you're able to get, but it's also what gives your body shape. So the more you have going into a cut, the leaner you'll be able to get, and the better you'll look coming out of it. Step number 2, creating your initial calorie deficit. Now, once your body's primed and you're ready to go, the next step is setting up your deficit. And here's where a lot of people go wrong and throw off their whole fat loss phase basically from the start. They either go way too aggressive, like I did, slash calories ridiculously low, start doing insane amounts of cardio, or they go way too slow and drag on what should be a get in and get out process on forever. So the key is periodization. Structuring your fat loss diet in phases versus treating it like a straight line. Now, at the start of a diet, you are in the best position to be able to push harder. You've got more body fat, your energy levels are higher, there is no diet fatigue present, you're mentally fresh, which is why I like starting with a steeper rate of loss out of the gate when we have the ability to pull off a chunk of body fat relatively quickly with no detriment to your gym performance or running the risk of losing muscle. So I like starting off with a 20 to 25% calorie deficit, a reduction from your maintenance calories, and aiming for a slightly faster rate of loss. So looking for that 1 to 1.5% of your body weight per week. And the best way to think about setting up your fat loss phase is exactly like landing a plane. At the start, you're 30,000 feet in the air. You can afford a steep descent. They go from 30,000 to 10,000 pretty quick. But then as you get closer to the runway, you're not coming in that hot. You need to smooth things out and level off. We apply the exact same approach when dieting. When you have more body fat, you want to be more aggressive. Then, as you get leaner, you pull things back and you smooth things out. So you then reduce the rate of loss closer to 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week to manage fatigue, protect your muscle tissue, and then sustain the process and get to your goal still in a great spot. Step number 3, we want to train to build and, most importantly, retain muscle. First things first, I got to get out the way. There is no such thing as a fat loss workout. Don't go in the gym and do some nonsense like high rep sets, low rest in between, supersetting, this and that, because your training should look the exact same as if you were bulking as if your goal was to build as much muscle as possible, because that's how we're going to retain, if not build, muscle throughout our fat loss phase. So we retain all of the muscle very simply by signaling to our body to keep that muscle around. And we do that by training within our recovery capacity and trying to maintain our strength, if not still progressing our lifts while training in very close proximity to failure. Now, with that said, there are a few differences when it comes to training in a fat loss phase. And the first one is lowering your volume. Somewhere around 8 to 15 sets per muscle group per week is what I've generally found is the sweet spot for myself and clients. Because when you're in a deficit, recovery is lower. You don't have as much food. So adding junk volume, doing more sets than you can recover from, just digs you into a fatigue hole, and fatigue will stall fat loss. Not to mention, especially as you get later into the diet, goal shifts much more towards muscle retention, not necessarily building muscle. And we need far less sets to maintain muscle than build it. The next part that's absolutely huge is that we need to be tracking our performance. So you can use a logbook, an app, pen and paper, because strength is the best signal to your body to maintain muscle mass. If you start to see your numbers dip, that's either a sign you're, one, under recovering and you either need a deload, diet break, or refeed, which we'll get into, or two, you need to lower your volume because you're no longer recovering from that amount of sets. And then the last part to training during a fat loss phase is chasing strength retention. If you can say keep 90 to 95% of your strength while cutting, you're golden. You're in a great place for muscle retention. Step number 4, cardio and NEAT. Now, some of you may think cardio and fat loss go hand in hand, but I'm here to tell you that is simply not the case. Your body fat isn't coming off because of how long you grind away on the Stairmaster. It's coming off because of the calorie deficit you create. And cardio is just one tool in our toolbox to help you tip that energy balance equation in our favor. Now, here's the issue with cardio that most people miss, that I didn't know about for the first 3 years of trying to get lean, and I would spend hours on the Stairmaster. I got up to 2 hours a day at one point. Hour in the morning I go to the gym, and then I'd do an hour post workout. And the truth is, the more cardio you do, the greater the chance it starts working against you. The goal is to create a deficit with the least impairment to resistance training, because we know resistance training is the stimulus that tells your body to hold on to muscle. Now, cardio, especially when you push it for long duration and you push it hard, is essentially the opposite of that stimulus that leads to worse performance in the gym, more fatigue systemically and locally as well, and ultimately a greater risk of muscle loss. And if you're here watching this video, I'd assume your goal isn't just to get smaller throughout your diet, it's to get leaner while keeping every ounce of muscle you've built, if not build some throughout the process. So that begs the question, how do you program cardio effectively? One, dialing in your steps should be your primary fat loss variable to work with. And I do see this as the largest lever you can really pull to create the deficit. Now, if you're someone that already has cardio in place during, let's say, your gaining phase or bulk, which is a great idea to do if you're going to go into a gaining phase or bulk, you should keep that in place when you start your fat loss phase. That way you don't go from zero cardio straight into implementing a ton when you're already in a calorie deficit, because doing so would bring in a huge volume of cardio without any prior adaptations, which makes it much more challenging and potentially more detrimental. So the least intrusive option we have available to us is steps, just walking and staying active. And that is the easiest way to create a calorie deficit without impairing recovery or training performance. Now, say you get to the point where you need to add in cardio. Personally, I would prioritize more low intensity or moderate intensity steady state cardio over HIIT, because it's very taxing on the central nervous system. And even if you can do it in ways that don't add much localized fatigue, like short sets on the spin bike or battle ropes as an example, it still ramps up systemic fatigue far more than steady state cardio. But when it comes to cardio, here are a few guidelines I'd follow. First, no session is longer than 30 minutes, because the longer the sessions, the higher the risk of interfering with muscle retention. Second, choose cardio options with no eccentric loading. So, for example, this would look like the elliptical or spin bike, both of which are just pushing motions, and I'd avoid things like the Stairmaster where you're slamming your legs down every step, because, yeah, it's very time efficient, burns a lot of calories, but it also adds a ton of unnecessary fatigue, especially to your legs. Third, build in de-output days, early in your diet especially. Now, everyone talks about refeeds and diet breaks, and we 100% will get to that, but on the other side of the equation, you can pull back on cardio instead of adding food. And during the earlier stages of your fat loss phase, of your cut, training fatigue is often a bigger problem than diet fatigue. So a day where you lower your cardio, you lower your steps, you potentially don't train, and you keep calories at maintenance can be a huge recovery tool to implement periodically, especially if you're someone that has to do a lot of cardio. Fourth, and this one's pretty straightforward, pretty common to know, keep cardio away from your lifts whenever possible. The farther away from your weight training you can do it, the better. And you don't have to do it all in one go either. You can 100% split it up. For example, 20 minutes in the morning right when you wake up, then a 20 to 30 minute block later in the day or post workout. And finally, steps. This is where a lot of people go wrong and is quite the fat loss hack. Like, for example, in the past, I would be barely breaking 5K steps a day. Now, during my fat loss phases, I push my steps up to 15, 16K per day to drive the deficit, which is the highest my steps got in my most recent diet. And I didn't do any cardio that diet, which is often the approach I take with clients as well. And that alone burns an extra 600 calories a day, literally the difference between needing 40 minutes of grinding on the Stairmaster or not. Step 5, solving fat loss stalls. Now, at some point in every fat loss phase, you're going to hit a stall or you're going to plateau. Scale weight will stall. You'll look the same in the mirror, and your current calories and level of expenditure will no longer be enough to continue and see fat loss progress. Now, when this happens, do not panic. The first thing most people do is immediately slash, let's say, 500 calories or start to double their cardio. And that's literally the worst move you can make. Think of it like this, right? If something breaks on my motorcycle and all it needs is like a tiny screw, I'm not going to bring out the biggest wrench I have and some massive bolt. Same thing with fat loss. You don't throw your biggest tool at the first sign of a plateau. You fix it with the smallest adjustment needed to get things moving again. Now, before we get into the exact changes to make when you do stall, first, make sure it's actually a real stall. So 1 or 2 days with no change in weight does not count. A true plateau is when you've gone 7 to 14 days with no movement in weight, no visual changes, because you could be building muscle at the same time, or if you're taking measurements, you're not seeing any measurement shifting. That's when we now troubleshoot. So step 1, before you do anything, audit your calorie intake. Most stalls are actually just accuracy issues. Things like sauces, sprays, gum, 0-calorie foods, which actually don't have 0 calories, are allowed a 10% wiggle room in Canada and the UK, and I believe a 20% wiggle room in the States. So time and time again, I'll see a client will stall, we'll dig a little deeper, and we'll find out they've actually just increased their use of 0-calorie sauces, and at the same time, potentially their cooking oils, and just those alone is more than enough to throw off your deficit. So once you've done that, audit your output. Now, early on, your cardio and steps, they're going to be fairly easy. By weeks, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10, you may start to drag through sessions, start walking a little slower, hanging onto the treadmill rails potentially. So we have to standardize your effort. So first and foremost, track your steps and track your heart rate when you're doing cardio, because you will get fitter throughout your fat loss phase. So if you're not tracking your heart rate, the same 20 minutes of cardio at the beginning of your fat loss phase is now burning potentially way fewer calories compared to week 1. Step 2, create a deficit strategically. Now, if calorie intake is locked in, output, you got that standardized, now it's time to adjust. But remember, like my bike analogy, one tool at a time. So if you need a little more of a deficit, drop 100 calories, not 500. Add potentially 5 minutes of cardio, not an hour. We want to make one small adjustment at a time to leave us with all our tools for as long as possible. So again, fat loss stalls are completely normal. You will eventually stall, but don't panic when that happens. Audit your intake honestly, audit your output, and then only pull out the smallest tool you need to get you moving again. Step number 6, fatigue management, diet breaks, and refeeds. Now, no matter how well you structure a fat loss phase, fatigue is going to accumulate over time. Hunger will rise, sleep can potentially take a hit depending on how lean you're getting, training performance can decline, and hormones begin to downregulate, like thyroid hormone, leptin, reproductive hormones, all shifting in response to prolonged energy restriction. Now, this isn't a sign that something is necessarily wrong. It's simply the adaptive process of the body to being in a deficit. And now this is where diet breaks, refeeds, and de-outputs come into play as tools to strategically manage those adaptations so you can keep fat loss sustainable and, most importantly, productive. One of the biggest misconceptions is that fat loss is linear. It's a straight line that you just push the deficit until you're shredded. In reality, you want to think of fat loss, like I said earlier, exactly like landing a plane. Exactly like landing a plane. At the start of the diet, when energy availability is high, you're carrying more body fat, you can afford to be aggressive. That's your steep descent. You go from 30,000 to 10,000 feet fairly quickly. So a higher rate of loss, losing 1 to 1.5% of your body weight per week with minimal fatigue. But as you get leaner, as you have less body fat, as diet fatigue accumulates, hormones downregulate further, and your recovery capacity decreases as well. At that point, you need to level off, reduce the rate of loss, lower output, and in many cases, what I like to do is implement a diet break. So what exactly is a diet break? It's simply 1 to 2 weeks back at maintenance calories. Steps and cardio are pulled down as well slightly, training volume may be adjusted, and the objective is to alleviate accumulated fatigue. The body will then restore glycogen, thyroid output can rebound, leptin rises, sleep and recovery improve, and you create the physiological environment to then push forward without digging yourself into the ground. But definitely don't misconstrue diet breaks, or more specifically, refeeds. People often want that refeed. In the past, I'd have a cheat day and I'd call it a refeed. So they can just get a cheat meal, just stuff their face with basically whatever they want, which is the worst approach to take, especially when the real solution is sometimes not to increase food, but to reduce output. Don't get me wrong, refeeds, being single days or short carb ups, have their place primarily later in a fat loss phase when glycogen depletion is a limiting factor for training performance. But if the issue is systemic fatigue from too much output, like 15,000 steps a day or multiple cardio sessions, excessive training volume, then more food isn't going to fix it. The right call here is a D output. 1 or 2 days where cardio is removed, steps are reduced to baseline around 8 to 10,000 a day, and even training may be pulled back depending on how much fatigue the individual is carrying. And what happens basically 90% of the time after I implement one of these D output days with clients is body weight will actually drop several pounds within days. Now, this isn't from fat loss, but the reduction in stress and water retention, that was masking your progress. Now, if you don't have a coach analyzing your feedback, I would set things up in phases. So push hard for the initial 4 to 6 weeks out the gate like we spoke about, then program in a 1 to 2 week, even 3 week diet break at maintenance. And then once fatigue has been managed, once you're feeling good and biofeedback improves, your energy levels are up, sleep, then move into a moderate deficit around 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week until you either hit your goal or fatigue builds up again and it's time for another D output day, diet break, or refeed. Overall though, what will make getting lean almost effortless is alternating between periods of stress, being the deficit, and then periods of removing that stress, being diet breaks or D output days. So playing that game of pushing as well as pulling off. Step 7, maintaining your new body composition once you've reached your fat loss goal. Now, the first reality we have to face is if you got to, say, sub 10% body fat, you're not going to realistically maintain being shredded year round because at extremely low body fat levels, the body is in a survival state. Your energy availability is suppressed. Same with thyroid hormone, leptin, reproductive hormones, and hunger signaling is still quite high. So that is not necessarily a sustainable environment to live in. But the good news is if you execute the post-diet phase correctly, you're literally in one of the most advantageous physiological states you'll ever be in. Coming out of the deficit, you have essentially 2 highly productive paths. If your goal is to simply remain lean for honestly the rest of your life, you can hold yourself in that 10 to 12% body fat range indefinitely without ever committing to another dedicated fat loss phase basically ever again. Now, if your goal is to continue building your physique and move your physique forwards, you can now transition directly into a very productive growth phase where now, because you're lean, you have heightened insulin sensitivity, and because you're low body fat, you have a long runway allowing you to add significant muscle tissue with minimal fat gain. But in either case, the key lies in how you handle the initial, really only 4 to 8 weeks post-diet, because this window sets the tone for the next 6 months, even the next year of your progress. And this is also the point where most people make their biggest mistakes and slip up because it is hard. As the one side of it, the evolutionary response the body's given you just to eat, stop moving, conserve energy is no joke. So we manage this by first not making the mistake, thinking you can just stop tracking. Once you hit your goal, don't stop tracking. Don't stop weighing yourself, tracking your food, hitting your steps, and then all of a sudden trying to eat intuitively, because this is exactly when the body is screaming at you to eat literally everything in sight. So if you let your foot off the gas during this window, months of work can be undone in a few weeks, and I've seen it happen time and time again. Now, the second major mistake people make is trying to reverse diet. Now, on paper, slowly adding in 50, 100 calories per week sounds strategic, don't get me wrong, but in reality all it does is prolong the very state you're trying to get out of. You don't allow your body to start recovering and reversing those negative adaptations. So instead of dragging that process on, going 1 week 50 calories, another week 50 calories, the smart approach is to restore calories back to your true maintenance immediately after the diet, because this is what allows all those negative adaptations we want to reverse. Then only after that baseline is restored do we add food incrementally again when body weight stalls. So from there, execution is very straightforward. You continue to track exactly what you did during the diet: body weight, food, steps. You bring your calories to maintenance right away, not spending months to get back to maintenance. You taper your output down gradually. So you slowly taper down your steps, slowly taper down your cardio, but not in one big drop, but in phases. And when you do add food, you place it strategically. So first around training to support performance, then into meals where your hunger is the highest throughout the day to maintain your adherence. So that first 4 to 8 weeks after your diet, handled like this, will now set you up to pick what direction you want to go to. If you want to stay lean, you hold yourself in that 10 to 12% body fat range, adjusting your calorie intake only as needed. If you now want to grow, you've got the perfect setup. You can now push into a slow and controlled surplus for the next 6 to 8 months, creep up just a few percentage points in terms of body fat. Then you can run a short mini cut and rinse and repeat that process, which is how you add real tissue year after year without really ever getting overly fat. So for those of you who want to get lean with ease, you've now got the blueprint to do so. Give it a go, get diced. I hope this helped, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.